Vanessa and I are sitting here along highway, I believe it's 25, which runs through Capitol Reef National Park. We're outside of it, probably about 30 miles away, but we are enjoying wonderful tones of the Fremont River, which is down below, as you can see, towering above the river. These wonderful cliffs. Yeah, we're in Utah. And it's like 4th of May, which is a perfect time to be coming through. Nighttime temperatures drop down to 80 into the 40s. Daytime temperatures into the 70s and 80s. So it's quite comfortable to be here at this time. And right now we're exposing ourselves to the sun. And there's a reason why we're exposing ourselves to the sun. Because just like plants convert sunlight into sugars using chlorophyll, human beings actually do something very similar with the rays of the sun, creating what is known as vitamin D3. So when you expose your chest or other parts of your body to the sun for at least 15 to 20 minutes, when the sun is, let's say, at least a couple of fists above the horizon, because the lower the sun is, the less UVB you get, and that's what is converted into vitamin D3 by your skin, below the skin layer. When the sun's that high, your body absorbs the UVB and turns it into vitamin D, and vitamin D plays an incredibly important role in health. Now I'll have you notice we're not exactly exposing images of ourselves in this video. We're just going to show you the natural environment, and we're going to talk about vitamin D and the role it plays in human health. Now I may or may not be mistaken, but what I've noticed is your skin gets a little itchy when you expose yourself to the sunlight for an extended period of time. Usually it takes about, when the sun's high enough, about 5 minutes. And as I said, I may or may not be correct, but that itchiness is, to me, a signifier of the fact that your subdural layers are now actually converting sunlight in UVB into vitamin D3. Now what happens with vitamin D3, now I'm no expert on this, but I have looked into it a little bit, is it gets converted into a substance called calcitriol, because apparently calcium plays an important role in its synthesis in your body. So now the vitamin D gets converted in calcitriol, and the calcitriol gets stored in your fat cells. Well, the fat cells really don't need the vitamin D3, it's just a convenient place to store it. After all, fat cells, what do? They just hang around storing up fats as a form of potential energy, so that if you go without a meal for extended periods of time, your body will draw on the fats in order to create energy providing substances that your body needs. So fats can be converted, I believe, into sugar at some point through some processes in the body that I have not looked into. But anyway, the calcitriol is stored in your body, and it's stored there for a very good purpose, because ultimately it can be used to fight disease, and I'll be explaining that in a few seconds here. So as I described, the conversion of UVB into D3, for me it feels a little bit like an itch. But Vanessa was just commenting that she thought it felt more like a tingling sensation in the skin. Now, neither of us have read this anywhere. We're just giving our sense. Now, of course, a good way to test it would be whether you itched when there's no sun, or you didn't itch when the sun was down, let's say, closer to the horizon. So that might be a good test, which might demonstrate that, yeah, UVB plays a process in causing the tingling or itching sensation that goes along with the formation of vitamin D3 in the subdural layers. Now, as I've already mentioned, the vitamin D3 gets converted into calcitriol, and I'm not sure the mechanisms involved in doing that. It may have something to do with the bone marrow because the bones are the major storage sites for calcium in the body. So there's probably some kind of a role there with the bones. But anyway, D3 is created in sunlight when there's a significant component of UVB in sunlight. Now, there is another thing called UVA, and that's something you want to be more concerned with, because UVA is the thing, I believe, that is more associated with skin cancer. So if you are out trying to sun yourself when the sun's lower than the 25 or 30 degrees, you're still getting significant amounts of UV, but it's in the UVA component rather than the UVB. Of course, the UVA is probably always there too, but the value of UVB is so great that taking some risk for a limited amount of exposure to UVA is worth it. But being exposed to UVA all by itself isn't, because it could contribute to skin cancer. So we're still sitting beside the highway, two-lane highway that runs up into the Capitol Reef National Forest. Now, I've made a distinction between UVA and UVB. UVA, what is that? UVA, bad, right, Vanessa? UVB, good, all right? So UVB from the sun, and like plants, our bodies converted to vitamin D3, and D3 gets converted to what? Vanessa? Calcitriol. Right. So, the calcitriol is stored where, Vanessa?
Stored in fat?
In fat cells. But why would the body bother to store calcitriol in fat cells? Aha, you ask. Well, calcitriol plays a huge role, especially in combating viruses. So I'm going to have to explain how viruses work to the best of my knowledge. What happens with a virus is viruses are on the brink of being living things and dead things at the same time. So scientists are not sure whether a virus is a living thing. And probably one reason is a virus is unable to replicate itself by itself. So what do I mean by that? Well, bacteria can get together and they can transfer chromosomes from one to the other if it's by sexual reproduction, and they can create more bacteria. But viruses can't just have sex in that way. So because they have no atomic nuclei, and all they have are proteins, and they have something called messenger RNA in it, mRNA. So the way a virus works is very interesting. It basically wants to attach itself to some really living thing, and then like a little needles, it likes to inject its messenger RNA into that living thing's cells, and then it goes down into the ribosomes within those cells, and the ribosomes play a very important role. Ribosomes convert messenger RNA into proteins. Now, you'll notice that I'm just basically swinging the camera around randomly as I speak. And that's because I'm trying to keep the same part of my body exposed to the sunlight for a 15 to 20 minute period. That way, I don't get exposed to too much UVA, and at the same time, I get enough to create vitamin D3. Now, here's the interesting thing. So, viruses have to somehow inject their messenger RNA into your cells, and most viruses can't. So just think of a virus as like a floating dust mote, tiny dust mote particle, and there can be all around us. They can be in the air, they can be on surfaces, and what they will do is they will enter your body. So I don't know about entering through food, but sure, they can enter your body through food, through inhalation, through water, whatever. But that virus has got a really tough job, because unless it's specified itself to the point where it can somehow inject its messenger RNA into your cells, it's a dead end. It's just like having dust go into your lungs and dust go out, right? So it has to have a specific mechanism by which it can inject. So we'll call them little needles. But these little needles have to fit perfectly into the cell membrane, cell wall. And then they have to go through the cell wall, and they have to spurt their little messenger RNA down into the body of your cell, into the cell. And then the messenger RNA will float around until it attaches itself to a ribosome. And once it gets in the ribosome, the messenger RNA is basically a blueprint. So a ribosome will create the protein that the messenger RNA in the virus wants you to create. That virus has to be very, very specialized. It either has to be specialized in the natural world to enter into human lung tissue, or it has to be specialized using, unfortunately, modern techniques which can create viruses that can be used to attach themselves to human or other creatures' tissue, and as a result, have the capacity not only to attach themselves, but to inject their messenger RNA into those cells where the proteins can be created. Once those proteins are created, they can then take over the cell and they can create more viruses. And that's what's happening with COVID. The COVID viruses, in one of its many forms now, because it's had a chance to mutate, basically has learned how, or been taught how, to inject itself, attach itself to lung tissue, inject itself into lung cells, and replicate itself inside those cells to make more of itself. And boy, if it takes over, it can basically take over your entire lung tissue, leading to a point where you can no longer absorb oxygen from the atmosphere, which is absolutely essential to all the organs and tissues of the body for their thriving or surviving and thriving. And that's why when people get COVID of a severe form, they have to use massive amount of oxygen so that the surviving cells can absorb enough to feed the tissue in the body through the blood system. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit to that cliff opposite us. And you can see the roadway and a car is going by. Okay, now how does calcitriol play into all of this? Aha! That's the beauty of calcitriol. If your immune system detects the presence of a virus on a cell, it can literally inject calcitriol into that cell. And you know what the calcitriol does? It says, don't replicate any of this mRNA that's in your body. I suspect it basically shuts down the entire cell's capacity of its ribosomes to make proteins whatsoever. So that cell will probably die, but at least it will have sacrificed itself for a good cause. It will die, and it will not allow those spore, if you will, the viruses, to use that cell to create more virus. Okay. So now we know the role calcitriol plays in denying a virus the opportunity to replicate its proteins inside a cell through the use of a ribosome. Now notice a lot of ducks had to line up for that virus to be able to replicate itself. First, it had to be able to attach itself to human beings. Second, it had to find its way to tissue in the lungs where it can replicate. Third, it has to have the perfect needle, which is those little protuberances that stick out from the virus, like COVID. Next, it had to be able to inject its messenger RNA through the cell wall. Once it injects the mRNA, it has to find its way to ribosomes. Once it finds its way to ribosomes, it has to make sure those ribosomes actually replicate that protein from the messenger RNA, and then it has to take over the cell without that cell committing hara-kiri suicide, because calcitriol was injected into it by the immune system and antibodies, etc., floating around inside your bloodstream. Now you can see why a lot of people can get COVID without ever getting sick, because their immune systems are so responsive, they shut it down quickly, and the COVID is unable to duplicate itself. So regardless of whether you're exposed to the COVID or not, the cells just won't make that crap. And as a result of not making that crap, the COVID isn't able to spread through your body, and as a result spew out more COVID into the atmosphere, into the environment around you. So I would say, roughly in my estimation, not being an epidemiologist, that ultimately just about all of us are going to be exposed to COVID. Of all of us, let's say the entire planet will be exposed to COVID. That's 7+ billion people. Of those 7 billion people, only 1 in 10 human beings, or 700 million, are likely to show symptoms of the presence of the virus. Of those 1 in 10, probably another 1 in 10, I'm just speculating here, will actually get the actual symptoms, and those symptoms will get severe enough that they need to be hospitalized. And then we can go on from there and we can speculate that 1 in 10 human beings that have to be hospitalized, that have had the support of oxygen systems and everything else, will unfortunately meet their demise. Okay, so now we basically understand that starting with your exposure of the skin to sunlight when the sun's high enough, you will create D3. The D3 will be converted in calcitriol. If you have a healthy immune system, that immune system will then use the calcitriol to shut down cells that actually have been attacked by COVID. Now, you could be exposed to massive amounts of COVID and it could get to every cell in your lungs. And if every one of the cells in your lungs is shut down, which is unlikely, you would die simply because all the cells were shut down, which is a very unlikely scenario. So you could still, despite having high levels of vitamin D3 and calcitriol, die because you've been exposed to massive amounts of the COVID particulate semi-living virus, which is why people need to socially distance and wear masks. You're going to get exposed to this stuff probably, but it's probably not going to have any effect unless you are overwhelmed with a massive amount of the COVID virus. So Vanessa and I have just spent our 20 minutes in the sunshine when the sun's very high in the sky, and we're about ready to knock off from exposing ourselves to the sun because now the UVA could be more of a problem than the UVB is a benefit. But we can also speculate about the sources of the COVID virus. We can also speculate about the efficacy of the COVID vaccine, but that's not for me. That's all speculation. I tried here basically to explain as much as I understand what happens when you are exposed to COVID and the reason why you may want to spend 20 minutes a day and maybe even 20 minutes on each side of your body naked. Well, we're not quite naked, we've got cars going by, to expose yourself to UVB when the sun's high enough. I recommend that you do your own research, think it all through, challenge everything I've had to say, and figure this out for yourself. And then, for yourself, you can become your own semi-expert on this particular phenomena, and you can make your own decisions about getting a vaccine, about wearing a mask, about social distancing, who you should shake hands with and who you shouldn't. All those decisions can be made by you, but only if you know something about the phenomena that we're talking about. Well, signing off from the beautiful Fremont River Gorge right here, Jeff and Vanessa enjoying our trip down through Utah and being able to share some of what we have learned about COVID and all viruses and staying healthy by exposure to sunlight. Enjoy this little tour up and out. So we like to say in the Southwest, adios.
We're in the Dixie National Forest. I love the National Forest because that means you can pull over and camp for free. And look, we found this beautiful little stream. We just came from an overlook where we met two doctors.
Yeah, so we were so excited about this video that we're going to do the edit right here while we're at about 8,000 feet up in the Dixie National Forest in central Utah. But on the way here, we just happened to pull out at a beautiful overlook that looked towards Boulder Mountain. It's probably about 5 miles back up and 2,000 feet higher than we are now. And while there, we were just talking with the folks, and we met one lady, and I was talking to her about the fact that we had just done a video on COVID and vitamin D and calcitriol, which you just saw. And after we talked about it, she said, boy, you sure know a lot about this. And as it turned out, she was a medical doctor. So as a general practitioner, she didn't necessarily have the background in what's really going on in terms of vitamin D3 and the inhibition or suppression of viral attack on the part of human tissue. So now you folks probably know as much as I do and she did. Now, however, while we were there, a beautiful Mercedes van pulled up with 2 people in it. We were joking around with them, talking for a while about enjoying our various modes of transport. And we talked about calcitriol, and one of the ladies, it was a couple, and the lady there was basically following everything I said and was actually adding information. She turned out to be a doctor herself, and her husband, her partner, turned out to be an emergency room physician. And he didn't know as much about the vitamin D cycle as you've learned about in this video, but the lady doctor, who's still a general practitioner, I believe,
From Minnesota.
No, the other first lady was from Minnesota. The couple was from North Carolina. So we basically had a chance to validate everything we've been saying in this video with medical professionals. Now the thing to notice is the medical professionals don't necessarily have as an extensive background in specific areas of medicine. They have a broad-based background, either as a surgeon, a general practitioner, or specialist. So they may or may not have the background about the vitamin D cycle. Some have more, some have less, but they all really appreciate the fact that vitamin D plays such a huge role in preventing viral spread inside the human body. One thing that was said, the practitioner from Minnesota said that they're so far north, it's very difficult to get vitamin D. She said that you have to augment your vitamin D from the sun. It doesn't last that long, maybe, I don't know, maybe a week or 2 in your fat cells. But you have to augment on a regular basis. So she says during the wintertime up north, you must take vitamin D as a supplement. She also pointed out that your skin color plays a huge role in how much time you have to expose yourself to the sun. So we Güeros, Caucasians with white skin, only need 20 to 30 minutes a day. But if you're a really dark-skinned person, you may need 10 times as much exposure to the sun in order to generate the vitamin D necessary to keep your levels up. And she specified ideally around 50 international units of vitamin D. I'm not sure what that means, but it's an agreed upon amount of vitamin D or calcitriol that needs to be in your blood circulating. So there you have it, one of those universal convergences where this guy who likes to speculate on all kinds of things, me, and professionals in the area all had a chance to come together and learn something from one another, and actually we really enjoyed our company there. We had a wonderful time meeting these folks. So, Vanessa, anything to add?
And also to remember that we got our information originally from this little booklet. It's called Vitamin D, the Sunshine Vitamin. It's written by a doctor up there in Canada.
We don't have the name. We will add it as a comment when we get the book again when we return to Oregon. So, once again, adios.